Sagittarius. A separation you didn't expect. God saw something you didn't. Sagittarius, have you ever felt the silence that follows when a door closes so suddenly? It leaves your soul echoing? That moment when you gave your all. Your loyalty, your fire, your boundless heart. And suddenly found yourself standing in the quiet aftermath, wondering how something so bright could vanish without warning. You had plans, dreams, and a future that seemed certain. Yet, almost overnight, what once felt eternal dissolved into a silence you didn't know how to fill. You keep replaying the memories, searching for the moment it began to unravel, the sign you somehow missed. Because Sagittarius doesn't give up easily. You're the fighter, the seeker, the believer in love's redemptive power. So when this separation came swift, unexpected, unexplainable, it felt not only like loss but like betrayal. But what if this ending wasn't punishment? What if the universe intervened, not to take from you but to protect you? What if what feels like abandonment is actually divine redirection? You see, God saw what your heart, full of hope and faith, could not yet see. He saw a truth hidden beneath the charm, a shadow behind the smile, a weight that would have dimmed your spirit beyond recognition. Sagittarius, this isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your return, to your truth, your freedom, and your divine light. Stay with me, because what you've lost is nothing compared to what you're about to regain. Gate 1. When the separation arrives without warning. Sagittarius, the first wave of pain came quietly, didn't it? There wasn't an explosion, no dramatic farewell, no cinematic goodbye. Just a sudden silence, a presence fading, a message unanswered, a routine disrupted. You looked around and realized that the person you were certain would walk beside you for years to come had simply vanished from your path. And what stunned you most wasn't the loss itself, but how unprepared you were for it. You, who always see patterns, who always trust your instincts, somehow didn't see this coming. For someone as intuitive as you, this kind of blindside feels personal. You pride yourself on reading energy, on sensing shifts long before others do. But this time, the universe kept the secret until the last possible moment. And you've been asking yourself ever since, how did I miss the signs? How could I have been so blind? But the truth, Sagittarius, is that you didn't miss them. You chose love over suspicion, faith over fear. You believed in the good you saw because that's what you do. You always see the potential, not the flaw. The soul, not the shadow. That's the nature of your fire. It illuminates others so completely that sometimes it blinds you to their darkness. You wanted so much to believe that love could conquer everything, that loyalty could heal wounds, that patience could soften pride. And in that belief you gave all of yourself, your energy, your optimism, your light. You poured everything into the connection until your heart became the sun that kept it alive. But while you were lighting their world, they were quietly dimming yours. The separation you didn't expect was not an accident. It was an intervention. God saw what your generous heart refused to acknowledge. That this relationship was slowly rewriting your spirit. You were beginning to question your worth, your intuition, your power. You were becoming smaller to fit into a space that couldn't hold your fullness. The Sagittarius soul is made for expansion, but you had been shrinking for love. And the divine could no longer allow that. When the separation came, it didn't feel merciful, it felt cruel. Because you weren't given the chance to fight, to fix, to prove that your love could still redeem what was broken. Sagittarius always wants closure that makes sense, an ending that can be understood. But divine endings rarely come with explanations. Sometimes God closes a chapter so abruptly because he knows if he gave you time, you'd talk yourself into staying. You see, Sagittarius, you don't walk away easily. Once you commit, you'll burn yourself to keep the other person warm. You'll rationalize their silence, justify their inconsistency, and call it love. You'll pray harder, love deeper, and hope that someday, your faith will be enough to heal the cracks. But faith is sacred. It should never be wasted on what's already expired. That's why God stepped in. Because he knew you wouldn't stop trying until you had nothing left. You may feel humiliated, blindsided, unworthy. But none of that is true. You weren't foolish, you were faithful. You weren't naive, you were loyal. You weren't weak, you were loving. You trusted because you believed that goodness, when given freely, would be met with goodness in return. That's not failure, that's purity. The failure wasn't yours, it was theirs, for not recognizing the rare gift that stood before them. What's breaking now isn't just your heart. It's the illusion that your love could save someone unwilling to meet you in the light. And though this realization burns, it's a holy fire, the kind that cleanses rather than destroys. In time you'll see that the separation wasn't random. It was rescue. God saw the invisible decay, the resentment that would have deepened, the envy that would have grown, the betrayal that would have broken you completely. And he stopped it before it could reach that point. Sagittarius, you are ruled by Jupiter, the planet of truth. And truth has a way of finding you even when you resist it. This is that moment. You're standing at the threshold between illusion and clarity. You can either keep replaying the story of what could have been, or you can begin to trust that what is, this emptiness, this silence, this sudden ending, is exactly what your soul needed to breathe again. You didn't fail. You were simply too bright for a place that refused to let you shine. God saw something you didn't. He saw your future self, radiant and whole, waiting on the other side of this pain. And he knew you couldn't reach her while still tethered to someone who dimmed you. So he intervened, not as punishment but as protection. One day you'll thank him for this heartbreak. But for now, all you need to do is breathe and remember this. Your story isn't over because someone left. It's just beginning because you finally stayed with yourself. Gate 2. When divine protection looks like heartbreak. Sagittarius, the second part of this journey begins with a paradox that only time can fully reveal. What feels like your deepest heartbreak is often your greatest protection. When this person left, without warning, without explanation, without closure, you thought God had turned away from you. But in truth, he had turned toward you. What you interpreted as abandonment was divine interference in disguise. Because while you were busy building a future with this person, God was busy protecting a future from this person. You couldn't see what he saw. You were too close, too invested, too in love. You looked at them and saw potential. God looked and saw limits. You saw a partner. He saw a distraction. You saw a future. He saw a detour that would lead you far from your destiny. And because he loves you too deeply to let you lose yourself for good, he removed what you were not strong enough to release. Sagittarius, you are known for your unwavering faith. Your belief that everything and everyone has meaning. You believe that love can fix anything if the heart is pure enough. That optimism is your greatest gift. But it's also your greatest trap. Because sometimes that belief keeps you tethered to what is slowly destroying you. You mistake endurance for loyalty. You confuse sacrifice with devotion. You equate holding on with faith. But faith, true faith, is not clinging. It's trusting. Trusting that even when something you love is taken away, there's a reason you can't yet understand. You gave everything to this relationship. Your energy, your patience, your hope. You kept showing up even when your heart was bruised, and your intuition whispered warnings you didn't want to hear. You believed that consistency could compensate for imbalance. You believed that your love could awaken something dormant in them. You believed that one day they'd finally meet you halfway. But what you didn't know, Sagittarius, is that you were loving someone who didn't have the capacity to receive what you gave. The separation came when your soul was too weary to fight, but your heart was still too loyal to leave. That's why it felt so cruel. Because God had to do for you what you could never do for yourself. Remove you from what was poisoning you slowly enough to make you doubt your own perception. If he had left the choice to you, you would have stayed, out of hope, out of habit, out of love. So he allowed a fracture so sudden, so confusing, that you would have no choice but to stop and listen. And what is he saying in that silence? I saw what you couldn't. He saw the envy that hid behind compliments. The subtle criticism masked as advice. The moments of emotional withdrawal meant to punish your independence. The way your light began to dim, not because you lacked confidence, but because you were constantly adjusting your brightness to avoid making them uncomfortable. He saw the hidden exhaustion beneath your smile, the way you were performing peace while living in quiet chaos. And he said, enough. Sagittarius, you were never meant to live small. Your sign rules expansion, wisdom, exploration. Your energy is the cosmic traveler, born to chase horizons and illuminate truths. But this person was never going to walk that road with you. They were intimidated by the vastness of your spirit. They mistook your independence for distance, your strength for arrogance, your clarity for threat. And so they began, consciously or not, to chip away at you piece by piece. But the divine doesn't allow the sacred to be desecrated forever. When something threatens your purpose, protection becomes priority. That's why God let this ending come so abruptly. because he saw that if it continued any longer, your light would fade beyond recognition. He saw the quiet erosion of your joy and refused to let it continue. And yes, I know what you're feeling: confusion, anger, disbelief. You replay every memory, searching for what you missed, convinced that if you had just done something differently, it could have been saved. But Sagittarius, you can't fix what was never yours to fix. You can't heal someone who uses your love as anesthesia instead of medicine. You can't rescue someone who has made comfort in chaos their home. The separation was not a punishment, it was a prescription. A necessary wound to save you from a terminal one. Because had it continued, you would have eventually abandoned yourself completely. You would have started doubting your worth, your purpose, even your intuition, the very compass God placed within you. So now when you wake up in the quiet and wonder, why me? Why now? Why like this? Remember, you are being protected from a future that would have broken you beyond repair. This ending didn't happen to you. It happened for you. And though it feels unfair that the story ended without warning, know that sometimes mercy arrives disguised as disruption. God doesn't always give you time to prepare because he knows you'd never walk away willingly. So he removes you suddenly, not to punish your faith, but to preserve your fire. Sagittarius, take this to heart. Divine protection rarely feels peaceful in the moment. Feels like loss. But months from now, when your heart is lighter and your laughter genuine again, you'll look back and whisper, "Thank you." Because you'll see that this wasn't the universe ending something. It was the universe beginning something new. Something worthy of your light. Something that won't need you to shrink to stay. The pain you're feeling now isn't evidence that God failed you. It's proof that he loves you enough to interfere. The silence isn't emptiness. It's sacred recalibration. And the person who left wasn't the one that got away. They were the one who was never meant to stay. Gate 3. When what you lost was never truly yours. Sagittarius, the third lesson in this separation is one of truth. Not the kind that soothes, but the kind that sets you free. You've been sitting in the quiet, replaying every detail, every word, trying to understand how something that once felt so alive could disappear so quickly. But deep inside, beneath the ache and confusion, there's a whisper that keeps rising. Maybe it was never real in the way I thought it was. It's not that your love was false. Your love was the truest thing in that entire story. What was false was the reciprocity you believed existed. You saw potential and called it partnership. You saw fragments and called it depth. You saw what could be and convinced yourself it already was. That's not foolishness, Sagittarius. That's faith misapplied. You loved someone's possibility, not their reality. And God, in his infinite mercy, refused to let you keep investing divine energy into something built on illusion. You see, you were painting a masterpiece while they were doodling in pencil. You were speaking in truths while they were hiding behind appearances. And the universe, which is always honest even when it's brutal, finally stepped in to erase the fantasy you were living in. It hurt, of course it did. Because Sagittarius hearts don't love halfway. You dream big, believe big, hope big. When you give, it's complete. You don't tiptoe into love. You dive in, trusting the water will hold you. But this time it didn't. You crashed into the reality that not everyone who reaches for your light intends to hold it with care. This person was drawn to your warmth but unprepared for your fire. They wanted your energy but not your evolution. They admired your freedom until it made them insecure. They celebrated your brilliance until it reminded them of their own shadows. And so, slowly, subtly, they began to resent what they once loved. They started dimming you, correcting you, doubting you until you began to doubt yourself. They told you that you were too much, too idealistic, too intense, too optimistic, too free. But Sagittarius, that's what you're meant to be. Too much for small hearts and narrow minds. God saw this long before you did. He saw that while you were dreaming about a shared future, they were shrinking from it. He saw that their admiration was turning into competition, their affection into control, their love into quiet resentment. And he knew that if he let it continue, you would begin to believe their version of you, the one that needed to be less. That's why the separation came so suddenly. Because you would have never left on your own. You would have kept rationalizing their behavior, mistaking comfort for connection, and calling endurance devotion. Sagittarius, this separation is not just about losing someone. It's about recovering yourself. The you that stopped laughing as loudly. The you that began apologizing for being too enthusiastic. The you that started editing your joy so you wouldn't make others uncomfortable. The you that forgot what it meant to feel expansive and alive. That version of you, radiant, bold, unapologetic, is waiting on the other side of this grief. You didn't lose your person. You lost your prison. And I know that's hard to hear when your heart still aches for them. But in time you'll see that what you called love was a lesson, not a life sentence. Because love that demands your dimming is not love. It's dependency. Love that punishes your authenticity isn't sacred. It's selfish. Love that only feels safe when you're small is not partnership. It's possession. Sagittarius, your spirit was born under Jupiter, the planet of freedom, wisdom, and expansion. You were never meant to orbit someone else's limitations. You were meant to explore, to learn, to grow, and to inspire others by the sheer magnitude of your truth. But this person couldn't handle the size of your soul. They mistook your strength for stubbornness, your truth for confrontation, your freedom for distance. And instead of walking beside you, they tried to contain you. God saw that. He saw your wings bending under the weight of someone's insecurity. He saw your laughter growing quieter. He saw that every time you had to defend your joy, a small part of you dimmed. And because you were too compassionate to walk away, he intervened. The divine doesn't always protect you gently. Sometimes protection feels like destruction. But what's being destroyed isn't your happiness. It's your illusion. The illusion that this was love. The illusion that this person could meet you where you were going. The illusion that you needed them to fulfill your destiny. You don't. You never did. When you look back one day, you'll see that every unanswered message, every door that closed, every strange silence was heaven's way of clearing the noise so you could hear your own voice again. You'll understand that this ending wasn't rejection. It was calibration. God was aligning you back with your original vibration, truth, expansion, and freedom. And when you finally see it from that perspective, you won't feel anger or bitterness. You'll feel gratitude. Gratitude that you loved as deeply as you did, because that proves your capacity to love is enormous. Gratitude that you learned discernment, that love must be mutual to be holy. Gratitude that the ending came when it did, not years later, when you'd be even more entangled. You'll stand one day in the light of your own becoming and realize, nothing real was lost. The only thing that ended was your willingness to stay where your spirit was shrinking. And in that moment you'll finally understand what God saw all along. That this wasn't the loss of love. It was the return of your light. Gate 4. When God returns you to yourself. Sagittarius, the fourth and final revelation in this separation is the most sacred one. This wasn't just about losing someone. It was about remembering who you are when you're not trying to be who someone else needs you to be. For so long, your love became a performance of patience, understanding, forgiveness. You carried the emotional weight of two hearts, believing that if you stayed kind enough, loyal enough, hopeful enough, you could redeem what was slowly collapsing. But there's a moment in every soul's journey when love stops being healing and becomes heavy. And when that moment arrives, the universe steps in. You see, God didn't remove this person to punish them or you. He removed them to protect the parts of you that were vanishing in the process of trying to sustain the unsustainable. The laughter that had turned quiet. The curiosity that had gone dormant. The intuition that you began to second guess. The fire that had dimmed beneath all the overthinking. He saw how the very essence that made you radiant was being siphoned off bit by bit. And he decided it was time to return you to yourself. Sagittarius, you are ruled by Jupiter, a planet that governs truth, expansion, and divine perspective. Yours is a spirit that cannot thrive in confinement. Yet for too long, you were contorting yourself to fit inside someone else's insecurities. You stopped sharing your wildest ideas because they rolled their eyes. You stopped expressing joy because your happiness made them uncomfortable. You stopped dreaming too loudly because they called you unrealistic. You started censoring your soul, editing your brilliance, toning down your natural enthusiasm, all to preserve a connection that was quietly undoing you. And that's why God stepped in. Because the longer you stayed, the more you were losing the very qualities that make you who you are. He saw that the relationship had become a mirror reflecting your fears, not your truth. You weren't being loved, you were being tolerated. And tolerance is never enough for a Sagittarius soul. You were meant to be celebrated, not simply endured. When you love, you do it with unfiltered sincerity. You see the best in people often before they see it in themselves. But that sacred vision becomes a burden when you refuse to see when someone is no longer growing with you. You kept watering a plant that had already decided not to bloom. And so the divine had to prune your garden painfully but precisely. Now that they're gone, you're standing in what feels like emptiness. But that emptiness is not absence. It's space. Space for healing, space for rediscovery. Space for the life you were meant to live before you started shrinking to sustain another. You may cry in that space. You may ache for what's familiar. But slowly the air will begin to feel cleaner. Your thoughts will quiet. Your energy will rise again. That's how rebirth begins. Not in noise but in stillness. There will come a morning when you'll notice the first signs of return. You'll laugh without remembering the ache. You'll look at yourself in the mirror and see the sparkle that had disappeared. You'll feel an unexplainable peace. A still joy that doesn't need validation. That's how you know you're home. Not home in someone else's heart, but in your own. Sagittarius, the truth is, this was never just a breakup. It was a recalibration of your destiny. God was not just removing someone. He was removing distortion. He was resetting your vibration back to the frequency of freedom and faith. He was teaching you the most sacred lesson of all. You can love deeply without losing yourself. You can give without abandoning your needs. You can have compassion without sacrificing clarity. You can be spiritual and still have boundaries. That's the alchemy of this loss. It transforms your grief into wisdom, your pain into discernment, your heartbreak into holy ground. 'Cause now you know better. You know that love without respect is not love. That peace is not a luxury. It's your birthright. That endings are not failures. They are invitations to evolve. One day, you'll meet someone who doesn't just admire your light, but stands in it with you. Someone who doesn't need you to dim to feel bright. Someone who doesn't confuse your independence for disinterest, your optimism for naivety, your truth for ego. Someone who will see what God saw when He made you. A soul meant to expand, explore, and inspire. And when that person arrives, you'll recognize them not by how they ignite you, but by how they honor your peace. Until then, Sagittarius, walk freely. Let your fire burn again without apology. You are not defined by what ended. You are defined by how you rise. This separation did not shatter you. It refined you. It stripped away illusion so your truth could breathe again. So lift your chin, wipe your tears, and whisper this prayer. Thank you, God, for seeing what I couldn't. Thank you for loving me enough to remove what I was afraid to lose. Because that's the essence of divine love. It saves you even when you don't realize you need saving. Conclusion: the divine design behind the goodbye. Sagittarius, what you're walking through right now isn't an ending. It's a revelation. The silence that once haunted you is now becoming sacred. The absence that once broke your heart is beginning to feel like clarity. And that ache you've been carrying, heavy as stone, is slowly dissolving into something gentler: gratitude. Because you're starting to see it now, aren't you? What felt like destruction was protection. What looked like loss was direction. What you thought was the end of your story was actually the beginning of your becoming. You see, God didn't take something from you. He took you out of something that was shrinking you. He saw the smallness that hid behind that person's charm, the jealousy that lived beneath their smiles, the quiet resentment that shadowed their love. He saw that your spirit, your boundless, truth-seeking, horizon-chasing spirit, was slowly caging itself to stay safe beside someone who feared your wings. And He said, no more. You are a Sagittarius. You are ruled by freedom, faith, and fire. You were never meant to live in half light or half love. So this chapter closed not because you failed, but because you were finally ready to fly again. You may not have realized that yet, but your soul did. That's why, even in your grief, there's a strange sense of release. That's why, even in the pain, something inside you whispers this needed to happen. Soon you'll look back and see that this was the moment everything began to make sense. The moment your vision cleared, your laughter returned, your joy felt unforced. You'll understand that you weren't being punished, you were being promoted. And what awaits you next, the peace, the partnership, the purpose, will feel like sunlight after years of twilight. So breathe, Sagittarius. Don't resist the goodbye, it's the doorway. Don't mourn what left, bless it. Because what's coming is not a replacement. It's restoration. And one day you'll thank heaven for seeing what you couldn't. If this message found you in your healing, Let it remind you that your ending was your rescue. Like, share, and subscribe, not as routine but as a declaration. I trust the process. I believe in divine timing. I am ready for what's next.